My name is Chris Uli. I'm a sophomore here at Westminster. Cliff Hurst joined the faculty of Westminster College in the fall of 2012 with 30 years of experience in business and management, including 24 years running his own management consulting practice. He teaches entrepreneurship and social entrepreneurship at both the MBA and undergraduate levels. He is also a director of the Robert S. Hartman Institute of Formal and Applied Axiology. In October of 2019, Westminster hosted the annual meeting of the Hartman Institute here on campus. Cliff is also the editor of the Journal of Formal Axiology, Theory and Practice. Cliff returns to Westminster Thinks Big this year after his phenomenal presentation last year on formal axiology. This time, he's here to remind us that we actually know a lot less than we think we do. It has been a pleasure working with him and preparing the speech, and I hope you'll enjoy. Please join me in welcoming Cliff Hurst.
Thank you, Chris. I've been teaching one thing or another for most of my life, and I've always been fascinated by how people learn. But only in the past 8 years or so since I became a professor have I also been studying what keeps people from learning. And I've come to a surprising conclusion. And what I've concluded is that even though learning may be hard, it's not the hardest thing. The hardest thing is to know that we do not know. And we must do that before we can start learning. Now this puts us in a quandary because how can I learn something if I don't know that I don't know it? So I'm in a double loop problem here. It's a quagmire. I don't know my way out of it. I've been chewing on this for several years now. But fortunately, there are 3 scholars whose work have helped provide me some insight on what it means to know that we do not know. I'd like to share that journey with you through their scholarship. The first idea came to me from the philosopher Hans-Georg Gadamer, the father of philosophical hermeneutics. Gadamer introduced me to a concept called cognitive horizons. I thought that might be something about a limit factor here, but the word horizon is something I've always used in a visual sense, not a cognitive sense. So what does he really mean? And another philosopher whose autobiography I'm sure most of you have read, shows us the potentials and the pitfalls of visual horizons. That philosopher is Yertle the turtle. I am the king of Solomon Pond. I am the king of all that I see. I am the king of a rock and a bird and a tree. I am the king of all that I see. Now, of course, things didn't turn out so well for Yertle, if you remember the story. His ego got in the way, and we'll come back to that potential pitfall of ego in just a minute. But the third scholar whose work really helped me see what it means to know that we do not know was the psychologist Jean Piaget. Piaget was well known in the middle of the last century for his work with young children. He was the first psychologist to take the developing cognitive capacities of young children as a subject of serious study. He did a lot of experiments with children, including most of them on his own children. And one of the most famous of all his experiments was called the 2 glasses of milk experiment. And I would like to replicate that experiment with you tonight. So for this to work, I need you all to pretend that you're again 5 years old. Will you do that? Okay, everyone in the room is 5 years old. You're in kindergarten. And I'm going to take out 2 tall, thin glasses and a bottle of milk. And I will fill each glass up to exactly the same height. They're exactly the same height. Okay, class. Now, which glass has more milk? What's your answer? What? Neither. They're the same. Yes, well done. Okay, both glasses have the same amount of milk. Then he would pick up a short, fat glass, carefully pour the contents of one, not spilling a drop, into a short glass, Now, class, which one has more milk? The tall one. He said, are you sure? They'll say yes. He would take it, he'd pour it back into the tall one, and he'd say, now which one? And they say it's the same again. And the intriguing thing about Piaget's finding is that these young children are not guessing. They know their answer because they have a cognitive horizon that's based on the premise that tall equals more. So within that construct, of course they were right. Now, and it works at a lot of situations. A 16-year-old is usually taller than a 10-year-old. They have more age, so it works in a lot of cases. But he would repeat the same experiment with 7-year-olds. 7-year-olds, for the most part, would say, well, duh. Still the same amount of milk. You didn't spill any. Who are you trying to fool? You see, by age of 7, most children have an understanding of something that we adults would call the preservation of the volume of a liquid. We can laugh at the cognitive horizons of 5-year-olds. But folks, everyone in this room, no matter how wise or how old you are, we also have our own cognitive horizons. Except for adults, those horizons usually occur at the intersection of knowledge and belief, where those things we know bump into those things that we only believe. No, I'm not here to diminish belief in any form. Belief is an important part of our life. In fact, in my definition of faith, is that faith is belief in things unknown. We cannot know everything, therefore we cannot function if we don't also have faith or belief. But problems arise when we confuse things we know with things we actually only believe. Let me illustrate that with you. I have here a physics book. Now, how many of you believe that if I hold this book out at arm's length and let go of it, that it's going to drop to the floor? Would you raise your hand if you believe that's going to happen? Look around. Okay. Now, how many of you know that if I drop this book, it's going to fall to the floor? Only a few. Okay. Are you ready? Are you sure you know it? Of course it fell. Come on, this is not a magic show, okay? This is a Think Big talk, all right? Of course the book fell to the floor. The question is, what made it fall? What force caused it to fall to the floor? Gravity. Yes, you know about gravity. I know about gravity. The interesting thing is, if we were educated Europeans in the 11th or 12th century, several hundred years before Newton, we wouldn't have known about gravity. We would have said the reason the book falls to the floor is we would have some vague Aristotelian sense that the reason the book fell to the floor because it has within it an innate desire to be in its natural resting place, which is the floor. It has a teleology. Isn't that goofy? But educated people believe that. Now, I'm a social scientist. I'm not a physicist. This book is called Physics for the Rest of Us. I thought I might even grasp it. But I get more on that in a minute. I cut my teeth academically in an era when notions of social construction and deconstruction reigned. And the theory of social constructionism is based on the assumption that all reality is socially constructed, that there's no such thing as objective truth. Now, I didn't know, but just because I'd heard the name Einstein and heard of relativity, I assumed somehow social constructionism got its roots in something Einstein did. So when I got this book, I opened the first chapter, and it's on Einstein's theory of special relativity. I read it. I didn't get it. It's supposed to be for the rest of us, but it wasn't for me. I had to read it a second time, studying it. After a third time, I finally understood that what Einstein was found has nothing to do with social constructionism. Einstein never said that all reality is relative. All he said is that for things moving really, really fast, the time at which an event occurs is relative to your distance and your speed and the direction you're going from that event. So time is what's relative, not stuff. I thought, wow, aren't I smart now? I, Cliff Hurst, social scientist, understand the special theory of relativity. So I opened to chapter 2. It's on Einstein's general theory of relativity. I've not gotten past chapter 2. In chapter 2, the author talks about something called the curvature of the space-time continuum. I don't know what that means. I put it aside. I bumped into the limits of my cognitive horizon, but I've been at this learning game long enough to at least recognize that I can hold the tension of not knowing for a while, maybe hoping someday I can figure it out. And I was kind of okay with that. But there is a line in here. In chapter 2, the author writes, if you do understand the notion of the curvature of the space-time continuum, then you don't need gravity. The gravity as a construct is inadequate. It's not wrong. It's just not sufficient. If you understand the curvature of space-time continuum, then gravity becomes obsolete. That hurt. The reason it hurt, all my life, I thought I knew gravity. And it turns out all I did was believe in gravity. And that's where it gets sticky. The John Templeton Foundation sponsors academic research in what they call the area of the big questions. The big questions to the Templeton Foundation are those that occur at the intersection of knowledge and belief, of science and faith. And this is where they devote their attention and their money. Because these matters are so difficult to grasp, the Templeton Foundation has developed a specific methodology to address them, which they call the humble approach. They say if we are really to grasp with the big ideas, we must do so with humility, not with confidence in what we already know. And I don't know about you, but for me, that's hard. The older I get, the more lived experience I accumulate, the more books I've read, the more degrees I've accumulated. It's easy to get arrogant. It's easy to be like Yertle the turtle. So the challenge becomes, how do we stay humble in the face of the things that we don't know and possibly believe? And I'd like to share with you 3 things that have worked for me. Number 1, browse the bookstore aisles, especially the aisles of something you know nothing about. That's how I came upon this physics book. Secondly, travel internationally. Few things are as humbling as trying to order a meal from a menu you can't read and pay for it with a currency you don't understand. Been there? And finally, get a dog. My wife and I have a little dog. His name's Harvey. And we take Harvey for a walk twice a day. We live in a little neighborhood just south of here where every now and then between the houses and the telephone lines, you get a really beautiful view up to the Wasatch Front. One spring day, I was out walking Harvey. It was warm here in the valley, but there's still snow in the mountains. The grass was green, the leaves were coming out, the sky was bright blue, the snow was on the mountains, the sun was setting behind me, the ochres. And at mid-stride, I just saw this beautiful vista of the Wasatch Mountains and the setting sun. And I went, wow, I just stopped. It was so beautiful. I wanted to share it with someone. Nobody was with me but Harvey. And I looked down at Harvey, and Harvey didn't even seem to notice or care. So I picked him up. I held him up close to my face. I said, Harvey, look at those mountains. Aren't they beautiful? Just look at him. And Harvey was nonplussed. I don't know if he can see that far. So disappointed, I put Harvey down and we continued our walk. We came upon a tree. Now, you know what Harvey did. He immediately runs over to the tree and starts sniffing all around it and very enthusiastically. And at one point he looked up at me and I just could hear him saying, Cliff, get down here, man. Isn't this exciting? Take a whiff of this. There's a new dog in the neighborhood. What do you think? A Cocker Spaniel, Springer, or something like that? And at that moment, Harvey taught me a lesson that sticks with me. No matter how much I study, no matter how much I think I know, Harvey reminds me twice a day that there are parts of the phenomenal world I will always be clueless about. So that's my message tonight, folks. Learning might seem hard, but it's not the hardest thing. Especially in adulthood, the hardest thing is to recognize that we do not know. But keep inquiring, stay humble, get a dog.